What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Purple Bear Biology. This is Professor Hurley bringing you another cool episode on anatomy and physiology. In this episode, what we're going to discuss is blood typing. Have you ever wondered what blood typing actually is? Well, no doubt, you've probably heard of the different types of blood. But what is really a type of blood? You probably have heard of A blood types, B blood types, AB blood types, and O blood types. But what does all of that really mean? Well, let's imagine each of these as a red blood cell. Now, a really cool thing is that on the surface of all of these cells, we have a structure called an antigen. Antigens are surface proteins that act as chemical markers for cell recognition. I'm going to draw antigens on these cells in different shapes so that we can depict the difference between each of them. So we have A antigens, B antigens, blood types with both A and B antigens, and then O blood types that have neither A or B antigens on the surface. Now, you may be wondering, why in the world do antigens matter? Your immune system uses these surface proteins to recognize what are self cells, cells that are supposed to be in our body, and then invading cells like pathogens. In order to recognize this, they use chemical structures called antibodies. Antibodies structures kind of complicated and cool, but in general you can think of them kind of like a Y-shaped structure with a receptor area that is specific for a antigen. In this case, we can see that this antibody would match our A antigen. Now, you may be wondering, what happens if the antibody binds to the antigen? A really cool but unfortunate process called agglutination will occur. Agglutination can be kind of simplified by thinking of it like clumping. So if the antibodies bind to the antigen, then this will cause the blood to clump. And clumping blood is a bad thing inside of our vessels because it can restrict blood flow throughout our body. Additionally, it can cause the red blood cells to die, leading to a buildup of the products of our red blood cells inside of our body, and this can lead to all sorts of really bad effects, especially on our kidneys, leading to kidney failure as it tries to filter out the excess products. Okay. So we know that antigens are surface proteins that our immune system can use to recognize both our cells and foreign cells. Antibodies are the chemicals that they use in order to bind and recognize those cells. And then agglutination is what happens when antibodies bind to antigens. Now, one important thing to keep in mind. You yourself should never have antibodies for your own cells. Because if you did, the antibodies would bind, and then the cells would be marked for either being destroyed by your immune system or agglutination would occur. And those would be bad things to occur in our body. This is why we can't have blood donations from somebody that has antigens that we have antibodies for. For example, somebody that is an A blood type cannot receive blood from a B donor because they have a B antigen on the surface of their cells. And the A donor has A antigens, but that would mean that they would have B antibodies inside of their blood, and that would cause agglutination with those antigens. All right, cool. So we now know antigens, antibodies, and agglutination, and kind of how antibodies work. But you may have noticed that I left something else out. You've probably heard of A positive or A negative blood types, and B positive and B negative, and the same thing for AB positive and A negative, and even O positive and O negative. The positive that we have on blood is actually another antigen called the RH antigen. A negative means that they do not have the RH antigen. So we can imagine if we have blood type A positive, that they would have A antigens on the surface of their cells, as well as what we would call the D antigen, which is signified by the RH antigen. Now, just like with blood types, the D antigen can cause agglutination if the individual receiving blood has antibodies for it. This is why someone that is A positive cannot donate to somebody that is A negative. Now, this can all be kind of confusing, so let's take a look at how this might break down. Let's list out each of our blood types and then think about what type of antigens and antibodies they would have. If we have the A blood type, then we know we have the A antigen. And in this case, it's A positive, so we know we also have the D antigen. Now, if we think about what type of antibodies this person should have, they'll have the B antibodies because there's no B antigen present on their cells. So if we were to think about this red blood cell, we would have our A positive red blood cell with A antigens on the surface and the D antigen on the surface. So this means that they would have antibodies for the B blood type. So if we were thinking about what type of donors could donate blood to the A positive individuals, they can receive blood from A positive individuals because that is their blood type, and they can receive blood from A negative individuals because they do not have the D antigen and they wouldn't make antibodies for it anyways. Now, additionally, O positive individuals could donate to them because they do not have surface antigens for blood type, and they only have the D antigen on the surface of their cells. They could also receive O negative blood type because the O negative blood type will not have any antigens on the surface of their cells, so agglutination would not occur. Okay, cool. So now let's do it for the next blood type. So A negative individuals would have an A antigen on the surface of their cells, but they would have the B antibody and the D antibodies because it's an A negative individual. So let's draw this blood type out. So if I had my red blood cell, A negative, they're going to have the surface antigen for A, but they do not have the B antigen, so they would make B antibody. Additionally, they do not have the D antigen, so they would make D antibodies. So if we were thinking about the donors, the A negative blood type can receive A negative blood, but cannot receive A positive blood because A positive blood would have the D antigen, and that would cause agglutination with the D antibodies. They can, however, receive blood from the O negative individuals because they have absolutely no antigens on the surface of their cells. All right, cool. So let's try another one. Let's take a look at our B blood type. So we know that B positive blood type will have both the B and the D antigens, but they don't have A antigens, so they would make A antibodies. So we have our B positive blood type. That means it has the B antigen on the surface and the D antigen on the surface. So for antibodies, it would make only the A antibody. So if we were thinking about who could donate to the B positive individuals, they of course could receive blood from their own blood type. They could receive blood from the B negative blood type because it won't have any antigens that they have antibodies for. They could receive blood from the O positive blood type, and they could receive blood from the O negative blood type. Let's take a look at B negative now. So you can see it's pretty similar for each of these blood types. So let's fill in B negative. It will have the B antigen, but it will have A and D antibodies, meaning that it will have the B antigen on the surface, as well as A antibodies and D antibodies. So what kind of blood could they receive? Well, they can certainly receive B negative blood, and they can receive O negative blood. All other blood types would have either A antigens or D antigens, so they couldn't receive those types. Cool. Now let's take a look at blood types AB. So using the same principles as above, we can see that they have the A antigen, the B antigen, and the D antigen for positive individuals. This means that they wouldn't have any antibodies for the A, B, or D antigens. So what does that mean about donation? Well, this means that this blood type can receive A positive blood, A negative blood, B positive blood, B negative blood, AB positive blood, AB negative blood, O positive blood, and O negative blood. Or, in other words, it can receive blood from all types. This is called a universal receiver. All right, pretty cool. So let's get rid of that and take a look at AB negative. So we know that it's going to have the A and the B antigen, but will not have the D antigen, so it has the D antibodies. So when we look at blood type donation, AB negative can receive blood from A negative, B negative, AB negative, or O negative. It cannot receive blood from any of the positive blood types because it has the D antibody. Moving down, our next blood type is the O blood type. Now remember, the O blood type will not have A or B antigens on the surface. O positive individuals will have the D antigen on the surface, but they'll end up making antibodies for A and B antigens. So what kind of blood can they receive? Well, O positives can obviously receive from themselves and O negatives, but they can't receive from any other blood type because they would have A or B antigens on the surface of their cells. Then lastly, we have O negative blood type. Looking at the O negative blood type, we know that they have no surface antigens, which means that they will have A, B, and D antibodies. So what blood type can they receive from? Only O negative, because A blood types would have A antigens, B blood types would have B antigens, AB blood types would have A and B antigens. So O negative blood type can only receive O negative blood. However, one cool thing about the O negative blood type is because it has no surface antigens, O negative blood is the universal donor, meaning that they can donate to any of the other blood types. It's pretty cool, right? All right, so now that we have an idea about the different blood types and which blood types can donate to each other, let's continue this by looking at a really unique example that can sometimes take place between a mother and her child. Now, typically, there is no mixing of the blood from the mother and the child. However, if the mother encounters a blood type outside of her own, she will make antibodies for that blood type because the immune system will recognize that something is wrong. So let's take a look at an example. Let's say we have a mom that is an A negative blood type, but she decides to have a child with a dad that is an A positive blood type. The two of them together could produce a child that is A negative or a child that is A positive. If the blood type of the child and the mother match, then there's absolutely no problem. But if the blood type of the mother and the child do not match, then this can cause the mother to create antibodies for the D antigen that is found on the surface of the child's cells. Now, initially, this won't be a problem for the child that is currently inside of the mother's womb because the blood doesn't mix. But during birth, the blood of the mother and the child can sometimes get mixed together. When that happens, the mother would produce the D antigens. And then, if the mother and father decided to have another child, and the result of that birth is a child that has the A positive blood type, the mother's antibodies will then attack that child and it can cause her to have a miscarriage. Now that's kind of a scary thought. Luckily, with modern medicine, you can actually receive a shot called a Rogam shot. The effect of the Rogam shot during the first pregnancy is to cover and mask the D antigens on the surface of the infant's red blood cells. The result is that the mother never makes the D antibodies. So when she becomes pregnant again, her body will not attack the new infant. That's kind of cool. Super important, and demonstrates why it's so important to know the mother's blood type going into a pregnancy. Now, I should mention that if the mother was any of the positive blood types, A positive, B positive, AB positive, or O positive, then there's no need for a Rogam shot because she's got the D antigen, so she would never make the D antibodies. However, if she were A negative, B negative, AB negative, or O negative, then there's the potential that the individual she chooses as her mate to be any of these positive blood types, and thus her child could be a positive blood type as well. And that's when we need the Rogam shot to make sure that she doesn't synthesize an immune reaction against her next child. Isn't that all pretty cool? So hopefully this has helped you explore blood typing and got you excited about antigens and antibodies. If you have any questions, drop them down inside of the comment section below. As always, thank you all for watching, and see y'all next time.